Hi, I'm Jeff Franke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. When the Eastern European hacker group DarkSide shut down the Colonial Pipeline in May of 2021, the ramifications were felt across numerous landscapes. In addition to impacting air travel and triggering panic over gasoline availability, the 6-day interruption of fuel to much of the eastern United States led to one of the highest profile ransomware payments in recent history. Although law enforcement was able to track down and recover more than half of the $4.4 million in Bitcoin that Colonial paid to the ransomware attackers, two critical points have been made. The U.S. industrial sector was vulnerable, and they were willing to pay to restore operations. In support of the increasing concerns facing the industrial sector's cybersecurity needs, IBM recently reported that manufacturing overtook financial institutions and insurance providers and becoming the most targeted industry by cyber criminals in 2021. Joining us to discuss this ongoing threat is Eric Irvin, Global Director for Utilities and Manufacturing at 1898 & Company, a leading provider of data management and business consulting services. So Eric, thanks so much for joining us today. I think when cybersecurity started becoming a really big issue for the industrial sector, it coincided a lot with what was going on with the pandemic in 2020. And it was a bit of a surprise then to see the industrial sector being such a hot target for all of these hackers, but it hasn't slowed down. Do you have some thoughts on why the manufacturing and industrial sectors continue to be such a hot target for these guys?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. I've seen the same type of thing. So, as the industry, moves into the industry 4.0 and 5.0 areas, where we're leveraging more and more industrial IoT devices, sensors to become smarter, and then how we incorporate that with automation and robotics and to become a smarter, manufacturing floor, we're seeing this just exponential growth, across the digital technologies, and the leveraging of those, across the floor. But, manufacturing, is as they move to these advanced technology practices, it's resulting in many technology projects being run simultaneously. And so with that, we're seeing at times a fractured approach, to securing, critical infrastructure in the manufacturing floors. And so, a couple examples where we're seeing just some dramatic growth is in for manufacturing, the robotics, the process automation, remote controlled machinery. On the shipping and logistics side of things, RFIDs, chips, connected vehicles, and then on predictive maintenance, collecting data from operational technologies to predict maintenance activities. We're seeing that across all sectors. How do they become smarter, instead of time-based maintenance, windows, use predictive analytics, to do a more of a smarter way to time those activities. So.
No, it makes a ton of sense. I think it's a great point you make about the additional levels of automation and software that's being used to help sort of try to quell some of these supply chain disruptions. At the same time, it's extremely frightening to think that because of this, that also exposes the industry to some more vulnerabilities that folks can take advantage of.
And that's right. I mean, we're seeing with that, exponential growth in IoT devices, for example, just the attack surface is greatly expanding, and when that happens, the opportunity for breach, exists there. And so that's something that we're certainly helping our clients, in the manufacturing sector, address.
Yeah, I think that's a great point you make about the attack surface becoming so much larger with the increased use of these IoT technologies. One of the things that the industrial sector, at least that we've seen that they're doing to try to combat this, is they are coming up with more comprehensive cybersecurity plans. The problem is there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that does get focused on, but there's still some gaps in those plans. From your experience in working with these folks, what are some of the areas you see that they're just not getting to right now with these plans?
Well, it really kind of depends, Jeff, on the client themselves, and the customer. But there's always room for improvement, and that's one of the very first things we see. And so, when it comes to basic cyber hygiene, what are they doing to maintain patching levels, antivirus, access control, and account management, policies? Are they doing the stuff that really just kind of, like you said, the low-hanging fruit that's fairly easy to do? If you can do that, I believe you get 70-80% of the way there, but
Wow.
as companies mature their cybersecurity posture and they're driven to do that, we're seeing a heavy investment in asset discovery and monitoring and detection tools. And so vendors such as Clarity, Dragos, Armis, Nozomi. They're all great tools. There's others out there that are very good. And so these tools are providing a level of visibility into the ICS, IoT, OT type communications, the traffic, the protocols that your normal IT or corporate focused sensors really haven't been able to understand and interpret in the past. And so being able to leverage a tool like that to give you some of that visibility that's greatly needed, and understand, if you have a dozen new assets come online that you weren't aware of, where did they come online at? Who is behind that? What type of security do you have in play? Are they legitimate? There's all sorts of things that these tools can help bring visibility to, and kind of bake that into your security operations. But beyond that, we talked about ransomware, but business continuity, disaster recovery, incident response plans, that has got to be a focus. And if entities really took those things seriously, the impact of a ransomware attack, for example, could be marginalized. And so it's really important to not only do your backups, but are you testing those backups? Are you making sure they work? Are they kept on a secure zone, that maybe didn't get, or can't get compromised by a ransomware, and there's all sorts of ways to do that. Segmentation, is a really good example. But making sure you've got that, make sure you're running tabletop exercises. That's something that, if you're not sitting down with your operations team and walking through what the impact of a ransomware attack, for example, would do to your operations and how to recover from that, if it were to happen, you're not going to be ready. And so you've got to do some of those exercises that really kind of create that muscle memory and help people from across the organization know their roles and responsibilities when it comes to responding to something like that.
Absolutely. We're at an interesting crossroads because manufacturing enterprises want, like you talked about, that visibility, and they want as many people as possible to have that. But at the same time, that's creating, again, a broader attack surface and more security concerns.
Well, if I can dig into that just a little bit too, that is something we're seeing just a dramatic growth in. And so as companies deploy these sensors, there's all sorts of reasons to do that, but it's giving you more information about your operations. And that information is powerful. That's not just powerful for the ICS or, system that's controlling, the plant, but it's beneficial to your accountants, to your engineers, that are sitting in the corporate office. And oftentimes you want that data to go in some sort of a historian, for example, or a data lake somewhere where all this data is being gathered, so it can then be, massaged and reports come out of that. So you can make business informed decisions. And so it's the data protection piece now that's starting to get a lot of attention, because how do you know where that source of truth is at? How do you know the data that's being dumped into the lake, for example, it has not been compromised, so that when operations makes decisions based on that data, it's good data and relevant data. And so, with the growth of IoT devices, here's a new, threat we need to be worried about, and that's data protection. And these big giant data lakes that have all sorts of operation data, corporate data, including finance and all sorts of things. And so,
it's been an interesting evolution for sure. Eric, we've talked a lot about the bad stuff, and that's what gets a lot of people's attention. But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the good guys. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about 1898 and some of the work you folks do.
Yeah, so 1898 and Company, we've been around for a long time. We're part of Burns McDonnell, and so that's what's behind our name. And so Burns McDonnell was founded in 1898. Large engineering architecture consulting firm, and 1898 is that technology consulting firm. And so our focus in the security risk consulting group is purely on ICS OT cybersecurity. And so our team is dedicated and just full of professionals who have 20 years, either working in the industry or come from the government where they help secure critical infrastructure. And so we leverage that to really help our clients, achieve three primary goals, and that's safety, reliable operations, and compliance. And all three of those things, I think we generally kind of boil down. That is what our clients are generally after. And that's what we really help them do. And so as all critical infrastructure sectors are working to digitize their operations, cybersecurity has got to be a part of that. And so we help them through a lot of different things, but it includes diagnostic assessments, strategy, and advisory services. So that's one we're seeing a little more uptick in here recently. Is what is the strategy? What does the roadmap look like for our operational technology? How do we've got this tremendous growth, in digital services. How are we going to secure that? And so what does the budget look like? What does the resource loading needs to be like? How do we leverage the tools that we already have, rather than chasing a kind of a bright, shiny penny that's rolling, across the table? A lot of organizations have a lot of security tools. And so helping them understand and rationalize what tools can do what and how to, maximize their investments in those areas is something we do as well.
Well, I think it's reassuring to hear some folks learning to adjust a little bit and start with OT security. I think the sort of the prevailing thought has always been you start on the IT side, but all these attacks, that's where the vulnerabilities begin. It's on the operational side. So it's good to hear some of those changes being realized by the industry, and you're seeing it firsthand.
That's right. And we're seeing a lot of collaboration, now between the IT, the corporate organizations, their cyber team, and OT. And so that's something that I think we really stress when we do a lot of our advisory work, and we're setting side by side with our clients, is try to get representatives from IT and OT there. And it's really beneficial for them to hear each other, kind of what the services are, what type of capabilities that they can provide, maybe on the IT side to the OT side, that they can take advantage of, rather than having to stand up a complete parallel, security program and keep IT and OT siloed. There are opportunities to converge this in certain areas and really kind of operationalize and make it more efficient, to run and give that broader holistic view of security and the threats facing, the business.
Now, breaking down those silos continues to be a critical issue throughout the industrial sector. Looking again at some of the work 1898 does, you've said, Eric, that some of the biggest strategies and tactics that can really be effective from a cybersecurity perspective are device segmentation and passive monitoring. Maybe you can talk a little bit about those two strategies and what they mean in a little more detail.
Yeah, so I mentioned segmentation earlier, and so that's essentially addressing the threat of lateral movement. And so if someone was to get into your network, an adversary, are they able to, get access and credentials to other areas of that network? And that's called lateral movement, and so through network segmentation, basically breaking down different zones of the network into, layers. So think of it like your most sensitive, most important networks are your layer 4, for example. Then you start to layer a DMZ, a buffer zone essentially, and then you go into your corporate network, for example, and then you have your internet. There's different ways to segment that, and there's multiple ways to do that. But really making sure that your most critical functions that that control your digital operations, on the floor, for example, are in your most secured zones with the tightest access control and restrictions there. But we start to layer that with like multi-factor authentication for remote access. Oftentimes for even some of the devices and systems inside the data center. The server racks, for example, anything there, multi-factor authentication is a great tool, fairly easy to implement, and it's being more widely adopted and embraced by the company culture. And so people from the corporate world as well as the operations world understand what multi-factor authentication is and why it's important. And that just kind of reinforces the value of security awareness training, helping your employees understand why you're doing the security changes you're doing, and why it is that they play such an important role in securing operations, as a whole. But again, on that segmentation side, it's really just making sure that the devices, that are operating your floor are protected from other, devices that may not be quite as secure. And maybe not need to be quite as secure in other areas of the network, for example, but really just kind of nailing down, those zones and securing those through segmentation. The second is the passive monitoring. I mentioned how important visibility was. And so in the in the OT and IoT space, there's not been a lot of, vendors here, until the last 5 years, for example, that really understood the traffic protocols that were operating, except for the vendors, that provided those types of systems. And so being able to have these vendors come in and understand the protocols, understand what normal traffic looks like, and then report and alarm on stuff that doesn't seem quite right, and that's when your security analysts can work, with your operations tech saying, hey, we're seeing this type of traffic, is this legitimate or is this something we need to, kind of dig into? And so being able to have that type of visibility is just critical in this, expansive growth of digital devices across our operations and the manufacturing floor.
Well, Eric, you're bringing a lot more positive news than a lot of our other guests do. Usually we're talking about things that are keeping me up at night. But when you talk about multi-factor authentication, it's good to hear that the cultures in a lot of these enterprises are embracing this. From personal experience, I know when that first rolled out, I was rolling my eyes going, why do I have to do this twice and all this other stuff? But once you understand the ramifications and why that it's being put in place, it makes a lot more sense. So it's really positive to hear more people embracing that concept. You mentioned earlier on, and this is prevalent throughout a number of industries, but manufacturing especially has been hit hard with ransomware attacks. I mean, we all know about Colonial Pipeline and JBS and all that. In your opinion, Eric, and I ask everybody who comes on the show about this, if you're hit by a ransomware attack, do you pay up?
Well, I'd love to say no, and with an exclamation mark, but honestly, it depends. And so in my previous role, where I led a security team and, advised our executives and the board, it really kind of depends, and so you've got to have a robust backup and recovery, incident response plan, in place. You got to test that, like I mentioned earlier, but you're never guaranteed that the holder of those keys are going to give it back to you if you pay the ransom. And not only that, but you also help proliferate, the ransomware business. And so, I strongly discourage it, but I can't say it's 100% never. There's a lot of decisions and a lot of information that have to go into that type of decision. What type of data may be, ransomed at that point, and encrypted? Is it customer data? Is it operations data? How important is it? What's the reputational damage, from that as well? There's all sorts of factors that come into play, but I'd like to say no, but there's that little piece there that says it depends.
No, fair enough. Wrapping things up here, Eric, and looking forward a little bit, when we think about the industrial sector over the next year to 18 months, what are some of the bigger cybersecurity issues or trends that you see being as most prevalent?
Well, I see the attacks on ICS OT continuing to rise. And so I was reading an article the other day. It was talking about like approximately 400% increase in attempts to compromise critical infrastructure. And so I think that goes back to just the number of devices in the expanded attack surface that's there. And so if they can, come in and disrupt operations on a manufacturing floor, or create, chaos by injecting, chemicals too high of a level for safe drinking water, for example, or shut down the power grid, and cause outages for customers, those types of things create reputational damage. They create concern among the population. And so with that, I think those are some of the drivers behind the adversaries, in nation states that are behind that type of thing. And so again, I really think the ICS OT cyber attacks is going to continue to rise. Supply chain is another one. And so I don't think we have to look very far. SolarWinds was a great example, about the saturation that they had across the market, and how important that tool was for the cyber operations teams, and if something like that, or say a Palo Alto or a Cisco or another big vendor that's leveraged across, nearly every company in every sector, gets compromised, by a switch or a router or a firewall, that's been compromised, those types of ramifications have lasting effect. And so supply chain is something I continue to see, kind of ramping up in regards to, the attention it's getting. And the last is cloud services. And so COVID really accelerated our adoption and embracing of cloud services. We had to. People started working from home one day, compared to, all the time before, and they really had to embrace that. And so whether it's, Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, Oracle's Cloud, there's a lot of data now being stored, and managed daily. And so with that, I think that is going to continue to be an attack surface. But for the security technicians and the network technicians, those tools have a lot of security capabilities. I mean, a tremendous amount of, they have a lot riding on their reputation as well. And so the challenge I think that a lot of organizations face, though, is understanding all the different capabilities that these cloud service providers offer in their suite of tools, and understanding what capabilities they have, how to leverage those capabilities, how to turn them on and manage them. Oftentimes they're running an agile, release train, and they're getting new updates every couple of weeks. A lot of time the technicians, on the business side may not understand, what's coming out and why it's important to enable, and what that change management portion looks like. And so I think cloud services and attacks around that will continue to be targeted. But I also think there's an opportunity for entities to understand how to leverage those tools more fully.
Yeah, I mean, those are great points. I think one of the things too that we know is, as some of these attackers like DarkSide with Colonial there, I mean, they gain greater notoriety as well, and they become bigger entities that people are more fearful of when their attacks do take place, and they recognize the attacker by name. At the same time, it's important to point out we do have all these tools that are also getting better in thwarting so many of these attacks that we don't hear about and are occurring every day.
That's right.
Thanks, Eric. For more information on the work 1898 does, you can go to 1898andco.com. Thanks for joining us today. To catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. For Eric Irvin, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.